It's so funny because a couple of weeks ago, I know when we were conversing a little bit on Twitter, Matt, and I asked you about something about Doctor Who, and you mentioned about a Dalek prop, and I immediately jumped to it's from Remembrance of Daleks, isn't it? And the reason why I said that wasn't because I knew, although I feel like I probably had some sort of vague memory that you had said something at one point about this. It's just because that was one of my first Doctor Who stories ever that I saw.
Same.
Yeah, and I love it. I love it to this day. In fact, the funny thing is I can remember a time loving it and other people not liking it much. At least that was kind of the vibe that I got. And so I kind of kept it on the down low that I liked that episode so much, or that story so much. And then it feels like it feels like now it's held in much higher esteem than it was, say, 20, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And so now it's like great to be able to be like, yeah, I've always loved it. So when it was true, when it was like, yeah, that's where your screen used Dalek prop came from, I was just sort of like, man, that's the coolest thing ever.
Yeah. Remembrance is one of my first really clear memories of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And I remember my mum having to like explain the 60s and the relevance to Doctor Who to me. And it was one of the first that I had on VHS as well. So it's one of the ones that I've seen the most. And yeah, I mean, I was a child of the 80s and 90s. I grew up loving Sylvester McCoy and having to keep that a bit quiet around fandom. But he's had finally a renaissance in the last few years, long overdue.
I agree.
So I think it's okay to like Sylvester McCoy now.
Right. And
last.
let's not forget Ace as well. Like Sophie Aldred is just, I mean, she was one of the best things about the last couple of years of the classic series.
Exactly.
Without a doubt. Yeah. And I'm so glad she was, took part in the Power of the Doctor. I thought that was
yes.
Was
really cool. Yeah, it was so exciting to see her.
Yeah.
Just in case, I don't know if you're planning on keeping this material, but just in case you are, I should make it clear. I don't actually have a Dalek prop. I've got a bit of like crappy exploded Dalek,
which is even better.
Imagine people are thinking that I've got like one of the full size,
Right. And just for a little added context before I hit the record button, to bring it back to Quantum Leap, believe it or not, one of the reasons why we started talking about this is because there's a poster over your shoulder that maybe could be perhaps from A Leap of Faith. It's a poster that Sam walks past. Tell us a little bit about that. Where did that come from?
Yeah, so this is the level of research in Beyond the Mirror Image Volume 2, which I know we'll talk more about. But so there's one point where Sam walks past a couple of posters in Leap of Faith, a couple of boxing posters, and now we've got the episodes in high def, which we didn't really have much when I was working on the first edition. I have started to freeze frame and like look at stuff going on in the background. So these two posters came up and I looked them both up, and one of them is a well-known poster that was in Star Trek City on the Edge of Forever and about 100 other TV shows and films. And the other doesn't seem to have been in anything that I can find. And that's the one that I got when I saw it on eBay, because I thought, well, if it's not been on anything else, maybe it's actually a Quantum Leap original. Equally, maybe it's not. The one that is much more common and has appeared in Star Trek and everything else, there is about half a page in Beyond the Mirror Image Volume 2 dedicated to just listing all the times this poster appears before it appears on Quantum Leap. So that's the kind of level of analysis you can expect. The history of a poster that Sam walks past. It's so much more exciting than it sounds.
I think it's
welcome
fantastic.
to the show. Welcome to the show, Matt. It's been quite a while since we have done a cold open on Fates Wheel, but welcome back. It has been 5 years since we've had the chance to talk to you.
Wow,
in person.
Yeah, it's so good to be back. It's so good to be talking to you guys again. I mean, it doesn't. I know we've spoken a bit about this over the last few days and over the last couple of hours, because it doesn't seem like that long, because especially since the new show's been back, we've been talking so much over Messenger, But yeah, this is the first time we're actually seeing each other and appreciating how we've all retained our youth.
You flatter. So we've told this story a few times before, but for newer listeners who aren't familiar, Matt and his original edition of Beyond the Mirror Image was kind of the inspiration for Fate's Wide Wheel getting started. So I first heard about the book. You did an interview on the Quantum Leap podcast, I think way back 2015, 2016. And then I listened to the episode. And then about 6 months later, I finally bought the book. For myself, I bought a copy, and then I bought a copy for Sam as a wedding gift. I got them a proper wedding gift. I got him and Jessica a proper wedding gift. And then I got him another wedding gift. And I can't remember, I said something like as we were leaving the reception, like, hey, I got you an extra gift. I got something I want to talk to you about later on. Just want to plant that seed there. Yeah. And then
and also told me not to take it on the honeymoon, not to open it before we got back.
I was like, don't, yeah, because you will, yeah. Because Jessica would not like me then. And then a couple months later, Fate's Wide Wheel got started.
And I'm such a huge fan of Fate's Wide Wheel. I love what you guys do, and I've been following you since day one. So to know that in any way that was inspired by the book is just it's kind of mind-blowing and a wee bit incestuous, but that's fine.
Sure.
Well, one of the things too that's interesting to me is the fact that we reference your book so much on the podcast. And then in preparations for Beyond the Mirror Image 2, you asked if we could share like a library of all of our episodes. And now, you told us earlier that you have referenced us in the new book, which even further perpetuates that sort of strange incestuousness. And it's really an honor for us, to be honest with you.
There's two elements to that, because one of which is there's direct quotes from all the new interviews that have taken place on Fate's Wide Wheel and QLP over the last 5 or 6 years. But the one thing that it's not so easy to directly reference, but is equally valuable. I went back and listened to every episode of QLP, every episode of Fate's Wide Wheel, a couple of other podcasts as well, and used it for inspiration just while I was rewatching the episode. So although there's like direct quotes from your interviews with Jean-Pierre and various other people, there's also points that you guys raised that made me think, I hadn't considered that. And because of the nature of the book and the type of book it is, it's not like I could say, and Dennis Freimeyer thought this, but it got me thinking, and I was able to then take those thoughts, repurpose them for myself, and say, I agree with that. That's a good observation, and I noted that. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that isn't directly attributed to you guys, but has been inspired by things that you've said or points that you've made. And it's all part of that melting pot, so it's really hard to pick apart now.
Right.
Yeah, and I will say, I do not remember a lot of points we made during our original episodes, just the byproduct of being a tired dad and a lack of sleep. So I'm going to read some great ideas in this book, and it's going to turn out like they're from our original episodes, and I will have no memory, and the Swiss cheese and the
Well, one of the things too, I mean, I mean this just because for us, when we started the podcast, we literally didn't know if there would be 5 people that would listen to us. And I'm still surprised that there are more than 5 people that listen to us and that we're not related to all of them. But I just feel very privileged to be kind of a part of, the work that you're doing and that you've done, and to be able to have the opportunity to speak to you. This sounds so weird. And I don't mean it to sound weird, or certainly not self-congratulatory anyway, but to feel like we're peers discussing something that we're all passionate about and that we all that we love so much, because when this started, it very much felt like, to me, it was just sort of like, oh, Matt sits at the head of the table, and I hope that one day I can sit at the table, and and then just to realize how silly that is. But it definitely, it really did kind of feel that way because of all the work and the effort that it was clear you put into Beyond the Mirror Image.
Well, thank you. And Yeah, it doesn't sound weird, but mostly because I think I've been there in Doctor Who fandom for many years, kind of knowing the people that are at the head of the table, but never quite getting there myself, and that's fine. I have my own relationship with Doctor Who fandom. Quantum Leap, I don't know where I sit. I think because I wasn't really a part of fandom until I wrote this book, so it never ceases to surprise me that anyone looks at me as anything other than this random guy that wrote a book. But I absolutely have always felt that we're peers, and I've been excited the last few days at getting the opportunity to talk on your podcast, because the stuff, as I say, I've been a fan of you guys since day one, and the stuff you're putting out is great. So I feel privileged and lucky to be here. But we could spend all night just talking about how much we love each other.
Yeah,
right,
but
right.
glad you're here. So I want to, because you've said this before, and I can't remember if it was like directly like on your Facebook feed or in one of our messages back and forth, but you said, like, you know, Quantum Leap isn't even your favorite TV show ever. How much dedication do you give to your favorite TV show?
I have a Doctor Who website that's been running for 25 years next year that has that's where I really first started doing really deep levels of analysis on some weird ass shit. Sorry, you don't do beeping, do you?
That's okay.
We do not do beeping.
We've got an
Fuck
explicit
that.
tag. Yeah,
Yeah,
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, I mean, I think Quantum Leap, by virtue of the fact that, all right, so with something like Doctor Who, everyone and his uncle has written a book about Doctor Who and tried to pick apart different elements of it. So I myself and a friend of mine, Kevin, have been running this Doctor Who website for 25 years, where we try and take the really obscure stuff and pick it apart and analyze it, but there is slim pickings. Today I started working on a page, and this will just give you an idea of the kind of way my mind works, for the second season of Torchwood, the Doctor Who spin-off. BBC Two, one of the other channels in the UK, not the channel that premiered it, BBC Two was running a pre-Watershed version with edits made. It's only been shown once, but I got hold of copies of them, and Torchwood is quite juvenile and has a lot of reference to sex and a lot of swear words thrown in just for no reason other than to say, hey, we're post-Watershed. And I've started going through and tracking the edits, and I'm creating a page at the moment for the website that just lists all the times where someone said bollocks or let's have sex, and and they got edited out. But what this all comes around to is Doctor Who, and honestly, I know I've said Quantum Leap's not my favorite show ever. Maybe it is now. I don't know. I find it hard to pick favorites. But Doctor Who, I've been in that fandom for years doing that kind of thing, and there's only limited things that you can do that's new. Quantum Leap, what inspired me to do the book was that I couldn't find anything like this at all, that where someone had just said, even about an element of it, I want to put as much possible information into one place. Everything that anyone's written about the show has been kind of, okay, here's some reviews, here's some thoughts, here's some interviews. And it was always kind of scratching at the surface. No one's ever done the stuff that Doctor Who fans take for granted, where there's writers like Andrew Pixley and David Brunt, who I know and respect the hell out of, who talk about things like, well, on this date, this was being recorded, and Tom Baker had this type of sandwich for lunch. And no one had done any of that level. And this is important stuff, of course. No one had done that kind of level of research for Quantum Leap, which is what made me think I want to do this, even if at the time Quantum Leap wasn't my favorite show. It was maybe now, 6 years down the line, maybe it is, but at the time it certainly wasn't. I just thought this is something I could get my teeth into because no one else has done it, and that was the inspiration.
Yeah, that's totally understandable.
And it's absolutely true. I mean, we never had anything that was so exhaustive and you know was able to approach this show from so many different angles. You know, from obviously the behind the scenes stuff and the conception of the show, but you know, even the you know, foreign language titles for the show, for instance, and you know, all the little I mean, obviously, like all the little flubs or whatever continuity errors and stuff is there too, but there's just so much more, and obviously all the ephemera and going into into the comic books and the novels and unproduced scripts. And I just think that for me as a fan, I know when I got the book, it really just felt like somebody had handed me a roadmap to all of the things that I had wanted to know, but didn't, and also gave me the opportunity to, you know, obviously inspire the podcast, but I think gave me the opportunity to rekindle a lot of my love for the show, because it had been a while since I'd, you know, really watched it and really kind of, you know, sunk into it. And going through the book, you know, it felt like this weird thing where I was simultaneously, you know, talking to an old friend, because there's a lot of stuff that, you know, I was aware of, like I knew, I mean, I trolled the boards on AOL back in the, you know, the early 90s and mid 90s, you know, talking to people and trying to get information about the show and the books that I had read, but there was just so much more and so much more depth and so much more information. And again, to have it all right there at our fingertips. So all of this said, it begs the question, why Beyond the Mirror Image 2?
So this goes back to Beyond the Mirror Image 1. I had a self-set deadline, and the self-set deadline made a lot of sense because I'd got to a point where the research that I was ever going to be able to do was starting to draw to a close, especially because I wasn't a name in fandom. I didn't know anyone that I could reach out to and network with. I was just doing my own thing by reading a lot of stuff, listening to a lot of stuff. And I reached that self-set deadline and finished the book, but I didn't actually finish the book. What I did was created 2 copies of the book, one of which I tidied up a bit visually and sent off to print, and the other just thought, well, I'll just keep this to one side, and anytime I learn anything new, I'll add stuff in. The first one goes to print. People get it, people start talking about it, people start coming to me and saying, oh, if only I'd have known you were working on this, I'd have shared something with you, or I'd have told you about this. And so this kind of weird fake other draft just kept getting stuff bolted onto it and growing and growing. I then joined the Quantum Leap podcast, so I started working with Chris and Alison and getting involved in new interviews. And the amount of new information and corrected information as well. There's you know, some things that I just got flat out wrong in the first edition, but the amount of new information that's come to light, it almost became an inevitability. As I say, that first draft never really finished, but possibly it would have just died a death over time. But it just grew and grew to the point where actually, no, you know what, it's got to get out there. And with the new series just around the corner early this year, it became something that really just had to happen. But even by that point, I had so much extra information in there, and I had enough information that I could start justifying splitting it into 2 volumes. And that was one of the things that I decided very early on. One of the big things that I found, two big things I found disappointing about the first edition. One was the fact that I was working very much in isolation, and I knew there were gaps. And if you look in the first edition, and particularly look at seasons 4 and 5, which neither you guys weren't around at the time, the Quantum Leap podcast hadn't covered seasons 4 and 5, so there was very little in the way of interview material. It's a lot thinner. So there was that, and there's the fact that because I had a strict page count of 800, just because I couldn't find a bookbinder that would do more than 800 pages, I had to use a very small typeface. I could have edited myself. I could have taken out lots of words and made the text bigger, but I didn't want to take out words. By this point, I'd got every bit of knowledge that I could find in. So I just decreased the typeface. And as I started to add more information in, it became clear, actually, you know what, this can be 2 discrete volumes, one dedicated to the series, one dedicated to the appendices. And finally, we can allow the design a bit of space to breathe, and also give seasons 4 and 5 particularly the extra attention they deserve, that was lacking in the first edition. But also just generally so much more stuff.
So I'm interested because you said before, I can't remember if it was an update email or elsewhere, that there were some things in the book that you got flat out wrong. Like, what's an example of something that you found since then that is updated information in the new edition?
So it's mostly little stuff. I can't think of anything where like there's anything in the behind the scenes guides or whatever where actually there was anything big that was wrong. Some gaps for sure, and I can talk a bit about those. But I know, for example, in the one thing that really comes to mind is there's a reference at one point to a shotgun wedding, which I just totally misunderstood at the time what a shotgun wedding was. And in the timeline, if you look at it, you'll see that it gets referred to as like a double suicide. That's just mentioned in there. In the timeline as well, I want to say Al gets married twice. Somehow, when I was putting the timeline together, I had Al and Beth. Oh, obviously, Al gets married twice. Al and Beth get married twice in the timeline.
Oh, sure.
So there's a few kind of almost typos, not quite typos in the traditional sense, but things that when you look through it again, another round of proofreading would have.
I gotcha. I thought there was something you had said, something like originally you thought like some of the scripts out there, you had originally thought they had come closer to production than what they actually did.
Yes.
And that those were getting moved around to different sections.
Yeah. So that's another big one. So yeah, there's two. So in the first edition, I treat the unmade scripts as being effectively canon or as close to as possible, and I've done the same thing this time around. But there were two scripts that were produced as spec scripts, and at the time that I was making the first edition, I thought they'd actually got as far as getting to the production office, and that they were maybe on the slate for season 2 or 3, and then just didn't quite happen. And it became clear with some of the further investigations I did that actually it was a spec script in the truest sense, in that the writer had put these scripts together as examples of the writing that she could do, so she could sell her writing skills to other shows. I'm really proud of the work that I did on those, so I've kept that, but I've shifted it into the appendices and said this is not canon, even in the sense of, well, Belisario commissioned it and then it got cancelled. So yes, thank you for reminding me about that. That's a big one that's moved along.
Oh, that's interesting.
Going back just real quick, I do want to say that I think that your reasoning for producing this new edition, double volume edition, I think is spot on. I can't imagine, frankly, a better reason to want to update something. And clearly, obviously, the revival series, I think, provides us with the opportunity to talk more at length about something new. But the opportunity, in particular, with seasons 4 and 5, like you were mentioning, to get more information in there and mine new details is fascinating to me. Is there something that you learned in particular about season 5, but obviously if there's something with season 4 that you learned through the course of, doing this that caused you to have a completely different perspective on the season as a whole? I'm not trying to suggest that you came away from it thinking like this is the finest season of Quantum Leap ever, but I'm just curious if it brought any new context to bear on the season, in the course of your research for the new edition.
I mean, look, I love season 5. Finest season ever. In some ways, yes, I love the gimmicks. I wouldn't say that. I would say, I mean, there's some big stuff in there. Like when I first went to print, we knew nothing about the end of Mirror Image, and a lot of stuff has come to light over the last 5 or 6 years that I've been able to put into context, and some of that with my QLP colleagues, but also other bits of information out there. No, I think. All right. So one of the things that's become not become clear, because I think we all knew it anyway, but I've been able to draw out information from interviews at the time, is the amount of struggles that they went through just to get through that 5th season. We all knew they were on the line. We all knew there were budget cuts. But in the first edition, I was effectively saying, look, here's this episode, here's what happened in it, and maybe here's an actor saying, I had a nice experience on it. Now there's a lot more, there's far more information in from the production personnel, and the writers, the producers, the directors, kind of explaining those struggles. And like I say, we knew this isn't a surprise, but it makes it a much more interesting story of the 5 years, where at the start of the show, as you'll be familiar with from the first edition, you've got all these quotes from Don and Deborah about the ideas behind it and the passion that they were showing and all the opportunities they had. And it kind of tails off a little bit in the first edition, whereas in the second edition, it now shows how that converted into the compromises that had to be made, and everything they had to do just to keep the show alive.
That's fascinating to me. And one of the things that I'm very interested in, and it's funny, even before you mentioned this, the kind of the follow-up question I wanted to ask is, when it comes to the vision for the show overall, there's a lot of stuff that Dennis and I have speculated about and just maybe picked up on, based off of little interviews or snippets here, even things that are in the first edition of the book. Having that clearer picture of the compromises that had to be made towards the end of the series, did you come away with kind of any greater appreciation perhaps for, like, Deborah's vision? I think towards the end of the series was very different from Don's vision of the series, and I'm curious as to what information maybe you found to specifically illustrate that, as opposed to maybe just having to kind of read between the lines of certain interviews or things here or there.
Yeah, I think in terms of Don and Deborah, there's still a certain amount of reading between the lines.
Sure.
Because even speaking to the production team, we've had producers that have said, things were happening, their marriage was deteriorating, it wouldn't be professional of me to comment.
Of course, right.
But even in that sense, that says a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
So
right.
there's a lot more of that. I think one of the things that I didn't appreciate, just thinking about the producers, is Charles Floyd Johnson, I think his name is, the producer that came in the 5th season, effectively to kind of balance the artistic vision with the bookkeeping, and the part that he played with keeping things going and trying to get as much of that vision through as possible. That's coming out a lot more clearly in the kind of revised story that I'm able to show.
Was there ever any thought on your part, with the interviews that obviously you've been a part of, but also the interviews that you had access to that you didn't necessarily have at the first volume? Was there any, any ever thought on your part of including even more of that, of almost, I'm not saying that you would want to do this, and I think that it would be a detriment to the book as we know it, but was there ever any thought given to almost composing like an oral history, like we've seen with other books that are out there? Because some of those I think are really well done.
I'm thinking of The Office. They had one that come out a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And I was thinking of Star Trek.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh God, I would love this book. I would love for you to write it, curate it.
I think it's it takes a certain skill set to write a book of that kind of quality. I know that the type you're talking about, that would be a fantastic book. I don't know if I'm the person to write that.
Sure.
I have access to a lot of the materials. Trying to pull that together in a coherent way, I don't know. Maybe that's the next step. But right now, I've tried to I always try and pull direct quotes and citations where possible. So I try and get an element of that and a feel of, this isn't me presenting a bunch of facts. This is the people that were involved at the time talking through me. That sounds so pretentious, but
no, not at all.
By putting as much stuff in quotes as possible, I've brought that through, but yeah, I stopped short of sharing that, and that's simply because I know what my limits are. I know what my research skills are, where my strengths lie, and it's in this kind of book, not that kind of book.
Well, one of the things that I think that lends the book to being so authoritative is the fact that there are so many citations, that you do such a thorough job of documenting, where you've gotten every piece of information. And it's also really cool, for a nerd like me to look at that and see that and be like, oh, I should try and find that zine, or, find that, video on YouTube or whatever. Because there is just so much stuff, I think, that I learned, with the first edition about things that were out there that I was just completely unaware of or
Mm.
didn't have any possible access to. Being a teenager in suburban North Carolina, it was a little difficult to have the opportunity to get some of these zines.
Same.
And so I think that's today it's great because you can go to eBay and you can find stuff on there. Now, due to the revival series, slightly inflated prices, but or even better yet, and this is something that I'd be curious about, it would be wonderful to curate a place where we could get scans or PDFs of these zines on like a drive or something that people could have access to share that a little bit more openly with the community. Because let's face it, at this point, it's not like anybody's making any money. It's not like there's any infringement that would occur on something like that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I know Brian Green's website, quantumleaphalsplace.com, has got a lot of extracts from fanzines. And yeah, obviously I've got a lot of the raw materials on loan from another fan at the moment. And yeah, it'd be great to share those more widely. Right now the priority is getting the information out of there and putting them into a book. But sure. Yeah.
So speaking of those, I know we've talked before that you had this latest edition like almost ready to go. And then you got access to all of these fanzines. So tell us a little bit like how they came to be and how that changes what's going to be put out in this next volume.
Yeah, so it's funny because Sam mentioned about the difficulty in getting zines back in the day, and I being based in the UK have a similar experience and a similar story. But recently I made friends with another British fan who is, give or take, my age. So she has the same background as me, but somehow at the time was able to get hold of this motherload of fanzines that she just had stored in her attic. Emma Fee is just fantastic and a credit to fandom. And we've been chatting for a while, and she'd been kind of suggesting she might scan them in so that I could borrow them and have a look at them. And there'd be occasions where she ended up becoming one of my proofreaders. And there was occasions where she was proofing and she made comments saying, yeah, I'm not sure this is right, or I've got some extra information. And she'd take a quick photo of something. And I was like, Emma, you can't just keep teasing me. We've got to find a way of getting these to you.
Yeah.
So in the end, she lives about as far away from London as I do, but in the opposite direction. And she was visiting a friend in London about a month or so back. So we basically we agreed. She went down for the weekend, took a rucksack with her full of these fanzines. Wow. I popped up after work one day, met her for a coffee, grabbed these fanzines off her. Now, these are old fanzines. I promised to keep them in good condition, but it was so hard on the train journey home not to just keep opening up my bag and going,
oh, sure. Yeah.
I don't want to damage these, but oh my God.
It's like Pulp Fiction. The light just shines on your face from the rucksack. And, you know, it's like.
Well, the first thing I opened was The Observer, issue 1. I opened page 1, and it's got a whole description of the fire that I described in one sentence in the first edition. In I think it's Black and White on Fire. There's a line in the first edition that says, "Oh, the week before this aired, there was an arson attack on Universal Studios," and that's literally what there is. There's this article at the time written by people that were there saying these are all the sets that were destroyed, and this is their relationship to Quantum Leap. Boom! Wow. Immediately, I've got material for the first. I'm like, I've literally just opened up one page. And this is the stuff where it's not only new information, it's information, it's new old information. And that is like gold dust, because one of the reasons that I do the citations and I do the quotations that I do is because 25, 30 years have passed, and we have to have a healthy level of cynicism when you see people saying, I was there 30 years ago, this is what I recall. I don't want to be the one saying this happened. What I would much rather do is say, this actor who was on a 1-week job 30 years ago remembers this happening. And you can then take it however you want as a reader, how much weight you want to put behind that. And that's fine. That's just the nature of this kind of thing. Being able to take those quotes that were at the time and put those into context, suddenly it becomes much more immediate and much more reliable. So all of that data, and that goes back to this point of, again, not wishing to sound pretentious, this kind of story that I want to weave about the production of Quantum Leap. Suddenly it's a live story of how it happened as it was happening throughout all 5 seasons. And a lot of that has come from those fanzine interviews, which are just amazing. And not just the interviews as well, but some of the on the spot reporting and people saying things like, oh yeah, one of the cool things I discovered, people writing in after One Strobe Over the Line got aired saying, oh yeah, the first broadcast was just completely messed up. There was like a whole chunk that was repeated and a whole chunk that was skipped out. In all my years of looking at message boards and things like that, never came across that, but multiple different fanzines reported on it at the time that basically, until it was rerun on USA, no one had seen One Strobe Over the Line in the US properly.
Wow.
That's interesting.
That is so incredible. And I love the fact too, you make a great point about how important the contemporaneous accounts are to be able to have that information from when it happened. And while, certainly like the added perspective and benefit of, those extra years and getting the distance from certain events can certainly be helpful, to be able to know what was said kind of in the moment or shortly after the fact is, I mean, it's so valuable. And I mean, you said gold dust, and you're absolutely right. I mean, to be able to have that type of information adds a new layer to so much. And again, we've said it ad nauseum on the podcast, but context for us is just so incredibly important to be able to contextualize the episodes when they were written, when they were set, and now from our vantage point. And I think that just helps to add so much of that incredibly valuable context to the production of the series. Now, something that I would ask, and I don't want to frustrate you or cause you to, gain gray hairs, but in the treasure trove of information that you've received and all this new information you have to call from, are you finding that there are more gaps that you would love to fill down the road, knowing, that I don't have this now, but I know that I'm missing, issue 4 or whatever? Is there more out there that you're still hoping to find and use perhaps down the road?
So in terms of actual fanzines, there's a handful. There's definitely a handful out there. There's a few early episodes of The Observer that I don't have. But for the most part, I've got quite a complete collection. The question that I thought you were going to ask was, at the end of the first edition, there was a lot that I knew I didn't know. There was a lot of gaps in my knowledge of Quantum Leap that I just didn't know I didn't know, but there was also stuff that I knew I didn't know. Is there anything now that I know that I don't know? And it's remarkably little. If there is, and I'm sure there's extra stuff out there that I don't know. I don't claim to be an oracle by any means, but I'm now getting to a point where actually I'm struggling to find any questions that I don't have answers to, which is quite an unusual place to be in. And that's why I feel much more confident publishing the second edition than I did with the first, where I just thought I got a load of open questions I'm never going to find out answers. And now I have.
That's incredible.
So the biggest thing that has happened in Quantum Leap since your first edition came out, like second only to the new series coming out, is that 2017, 2018, Allison of the QLP podcast, she quite accidentally stumbled upon evidence of the long lost alternate ending that Don Belisario and everybody else swore that was right. that wasn't not even shot, but it wasn't even genuinely written by the production. So I'm curious, like, what information you were able to pull out about the shooting of that scene and like how close that came, if at all, to actually ever being used.
Well, it's one of those things. It's so many different bits to that story, and this is a perfect example of this puzzle piece that I've had to put together across a lot of Quantum Leap, but very particularly with that final those final scenes is all these little bits that have come to light. So we know that scene with Beth was filmed. We've seen it. There's the questions about the spacebar scene that allegedly followed, which we've since found. So since 2016, Richard Hurd shared with me a shooting schedule that included the spacebar scene. So that was another like, wow, okay. So I mean, it's in the script and it reads terribly. So we all thought it was a joke, but it's actually on. It's on the shooting schedule on day 8. So it was meant to be the final bit that they filmed. But all suggestions point to the fact that was never filmed, and certainly nobody involved in it. Every time we get the chance to ask anyone, whether it's Deborah or Richard or anyone else, nobody seems to remember it. So that probably didn't happen. And we spoke to Susan Deal recently. She said she thinks that was a rehearsal that maybe got filmed, but it looks very professional for a rehearsal. So there's still a lot of mystery around it, but that's one of those things where there's probably a page and a half in Beyond the Mirror Image all about that ending. And it's not just about a scene, it's about 2 scenes. It's about a shooting schedule from Richard Hurd. It's about a set of photo negatives that Alison found. It's about a scene that leaked onto Reddit. And it's about quotes from everyone about it. And trying to weave that into a single coherent piece has been a lot of fun. And then there's the fact, and this is the bit that I said I've got very few questions outstanding. This is the bit that I still cannot get my head around. There is evidence that Beckett was not misspelt everywhere it was broadcast. Mm-hmm. And that is doing my head in. Several people remember it. I've got an off-air from Philadelphia, and I've spoken to the guy, which I hadn't done last time I discussed this anywhere, so this is new information. I've now spoken to the guy who recorded that off-air, and he said, I did not make any alterations. That's not a fan edit, that's nothing. I've had that tape kicking around for 20 years. I captured it, I shared it. What you're seeing is what was broadcast. And Beckett has 2 T's in it. I don't know how. I can't explain it. But somebody from the other side of the country says she remembers that. There was a news group at the time that somebody posted in Australia and New Zealand, would have been like 6 months later, saying that they saw it with 2 T's. I know seeing it in the UK, it had 1 T. That is a mystery. How did it get fixed in some territories?
Yeah.
Especially on first broadcast. I mean, this is like... my understanding of the way that the affiliates would have worked back then is that NBC centrally would have beamed this out by satellite to all the different parts of the US, and somehow Philadelphia and maybe a couple of others fixed it.
Well, so that is only a half truth based on what I know about television production, and this comes from my wrestling background, is that there were certain places that did not necessarily have the capabilities to receive those transmissions at a high enough quality so that there would have actually been tape masters that were still posted to certain places. So they would get an actual tape as opposed to getting, a satellite feed. And I don't know that Philadelphia was one of those places, so this might be a dead end, but I do know that there were certain, because I know, again, from my wrestling background, Memphis was one of those places. Like Memphis did not have the same capabilities up until probably like, mid 90s. So they would still get tapes of all of these things.
I didn't know that was happening at that point. That's fascinating, and that's possibly an answer. That it's maybe they beamed out the incorrect spelling, fixed it, and that's what ended up getting mailed out.
Although you would almost think that it would have to be the other way around, right? Wouldn't that make more sense? That's so strange. It's so strange, though. It is fascinating to think about how that could have possibly happened. Yeah. And it's also fascinating to think that here we are now, 30 years after the fact, and we're able to have a conversation like this, because again, in all the years of my fandom, I don't ever recall that being something, and I'm sure it was, but just in my own memory, I don't recall that ever being something that was said on the message boards or in any of the news groups or anything that I was a part of. And so hearing about it now, it does feel like this new information. And it's strange to even think that we're talking about Quantum Leap in the same way that I would imagine some people I think the stakes are a little higher in this instance, but in the same way that some people are talking about evidence of lost episodes of Doctor Who, right? Like, and it's just kind of like, man, here we are, like having this conversation about Quantum Leap, and it's just so cool to me that that there are these mysteries that still exist about a show that's been off the air for 30 years that we love so much, and that we're only now getting around to putting some of these pieces together. And let's face it, a lot of that has to do with the research that you've been able to do. And I think that that's the other element you mentioned when we first started talking, is by virtue of producing the first volume, you've gotten attention from people that have new information to give you. And it reinforces how important it is to have that vibrant community around, that fandom be active and engaged, because there's so much that we can share with one another that goes even far beyond just saying like, I like this episode, I didn't, that there's a deeper conversation that can be had.
What I've been truly amazed by is the amount of people that have stepped forward with information, thoughts, memories, documents, so much. And also the chance to speak to people like Deborah Pratt, which has been fantastic. And that obviously I'd sent her a couple of gentle emails during the production of the first edition, and she said, "Oh, that sounds lovely, best of luck."
Sure, yeah.
And now I've actually been able to get some information out of her, but
and see her hold up a copy of the book.
that made my life. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Deborah's like anybody else in the business. It was a long time ago, and she can't be expected to remember everything. Fans, by their nature, a lot of us are nerds, and we have stuff documented. And the fact that so many people, my thanks to section in this edition has just exploded, because so many people have stepped forwards, either to say, "Oh, I spotted you got that wrong, here's the actual truth," or to say, "Oh, hey, why didn't you cover this?" Because I had no idea it existed, please tell me more. And people have been so willing to share and be helpful.
Is there anything?
Go ahead, Dennis.
Is there any new piece of information that you learned that just totally blew your mind, changed your perspective on the series in some way, either from a production standpoint or a personal standpoint? I'm just interested.
It's a good question. And you know what? This has been such an iterative process over the last 6 years. Probably would have happened if I'd done everything in the space of 2 weeks. But every new bit of information I've learned, I've been excited about it for about a day and then moved on. Honestly, yes, but don't ask me to quote anything right now, because there is just there's so much. I forget a lot about what's new.
Sure.
Well, I think too that you're not necessarily constructing like a narrative history of the production of the show, and I think in terms of that, it makes total sense, like you said, that it would be like, this is amazing, on to the next one, because you're having to get all of this information together and put it into obviously a format which is readable, which is something that people can enjoy and people can have, but it's like with historians who are writing about some sort of historical event, like you'll hear sometimes about how they'll get a nugget of information and everything now hinges on that. Like it's like, that was my key, my turnkey, that was everything that was in. And I feel like in a way for you, it's just the virtue that Quantum Leap exists is the turnkey, and so everything that you are able to learn, like it makes sense that it would be that's exciting, but again, it's just on to that next piece of information. Like that makes a lot of sense to me.
And a lot of what's excited me about this has been getting the new quotes and the extra. Actually, there's one bit I will share with you in a moment. It has been getting the new quotes and things like, "Oh wow, in the first edition there was nothing from Kimberly Cullum," and finding an interview with Kimberly Cullum was just like, yes, excellent, we have quotes from Kimberly Cullum. And didn't matter what she said, although she said some interesting things. Even if she hadn't said anything interesting, that in itself was very exciting. No, one thing I will share with you is I've recently started braving the world of doing my own interviews, which is something that I just flat out refused to do in the original. And I interviewed the guy he was the guitarist in the band in the Plays the Thing. So he's a genuine guitarist in real life, and he was brought in to be, I don't know if it counts as an extra, but basically a non-speaking role in the band playing his guitar. And he shared with me, I can't remember the main actress's name from that episode, the woman that plays Penny, but she was she was hired in because she was like a Tony winning actress, and clearly it was an episode that required singing. And what he shared with me was that they got her to record all her own stuff, and then in the edits they found that despite the director keep pushing her to be less show tuney, because that's her background, and be a little bit more like rough and rocky, she just couldn't manage it, and they ended up dubbing all of her stuff. So even though they brought her in because she's a singer, it's not her singing in the place of thing. And that to me, you'll see, it's an interview I ended up recording for the podcast, and we haven't released it yet, but you will see my jaw drop when he reveals that. It's like, what? Hang on. How did I not know this? And I'm sure there's a million other things like that where I just discovered these little nuggets and went, wow, and then moved on. But it's that kind of thing that just, mind blowing at the time for a particular thing.
Do you feel like, now that you've and before I say this, like, do you even feel as though things are complete at this point? Like, I know that there's still some work to be done on the first volume, but because with the revival series and with the work that you're going to do, potentially in the second volume as well, like, you don't feel like you're done yet, right? Like, you feel like there's still work to do to finish this edition, right?
So the first edition, it's definitely in a kind of tidying up place. It's at the point now where I was at with the first edition when I launched the Kickstarter campaign. So I launched the first edition Kickstarter campaign because I was very nervous about going out there and doing it. I waited until I was at a point where I said, look, if all else fails, it's in a position now where I could just go to press tomorrow, and it wouldn't be perfect, but it would do. And I could not be one of those Kickstarter people that just launched it and said, hey, I'm working on something, follow me. I didn't have the confidence. This time around, I did that a little bit more. I did it mid-edit. And then, of course, I had to roll back a lot and do a lot of re-editing and rework because of the fanzines. But I am now back at that point where it's in publishable form. It definitely needs design work. It definitely needs some tidying up. And there's a few bits of fact checking that I need to do on various different topics, but it's getting there. It's very close. My 90% of my time doing Quantum Leap stuff in front of the computer is now on Volume 2.
Okay.
My head is very much in Volume 2 right now.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about what is your plan for the new series?
You know what?
In the timeline. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just want to interrupt you real quick because I definitely, yes, I want to get there. But before we do it, there was something that I wanted to ask about, knowing, of course, that's where it is with the first volume. Do you feel yourself personally as kind of like this repository of knowledge about Quantum Leap, like the classic series specifically? Or do you feel more like you've written this book and this book stands as kind of a testament to your work, but you yourself personally don't necessarily feel like if you were in a room full of Quantum Leap nerds that you're the smartest guy in the room? Or do you kind of feel, and I know that that's a weird question to answer, but or do you feel kind of like, I know these things, like these are in my bones? Or do you just more feel like I've created this thing and this thing is kind of the repository of the knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different ways to approach that. Firstly, just from a purely practical way, I have a terrible memory, and that was one of the other things that prompted this book. There was a bunch of stuff I knew about the show, and I wanted to write it down somewhere. So, no, I dread it when I'm talking to people and they say like, "Oh, hey, you're a fan of Quantum Leap. Can you tell me what was happening in scene 36 in episode 28?" And did why was Al doing this and whatever. yeah, I have to refer to the book. So partly it is a tool for me.
Honestly, one of the reasons why I asked that question is because I feel very similarly. Like, I feel as though there's almost an expectation sometimes that because we have this podcast that we know lots of things about Quantum Leap. And for me, it's just kind of like, again, the community, like seeing the conversations that take place on Twitter and Facebook and that sort of stuff. I'm just sort of like, whoa, these people know so much more than I do. And I love that because it's like I'm learning things. But you know, it is weird because you do almost feel like this expectation being in this position that you know, you're supposed to know things. And instead I sort of just feel like the podcast is what that's what there is. And sometimes, like, I have to refresh my memory. You know, we did the bit for the Quantum Leap podcast with A Little Miracle. I had to listen to, you know, just little bits and pieces of our original episode because I had no recollection really of what I said or what I talked about. And so I think that it's just interesting. It's the way sometimes that I think creative people do work. You almost have to, like, you do the thing and you move on, as opposed to hoping to achieve some sort of like status, or you know, you're not a professor, you know what I mean? It's like the text stands as opposed to it being this this instructive thing. Maybe.
Thank you. That is put into words really well how I've been feeling the last few years. But I've not been able to word it that well before, but it's exactly that. I certainly never intended to elevate myself to any position of authority, and I don't feel like I'm in any position of authority. I feel very fiercely proud and protective of the book, because I know at the time I was working on the particular page that you're looking at, I was right focused in the zone, and whatever is in there is correct in as much as it's as well researched as possible, and if it's a quote from someone, that is what they said, and you can take it however you want, which is why I find citation so important. But that is the book. I think it's an amazing book. I can't quite believe that I wrote it. It's a very separate thing to me.
I love that. I really do. And I think that that's one of the things you have to kind of approach the work sometimes, especially when you gain any sort of visibility. And again, it's, I mean, we're talking about like a Quantum Leap podcast, which is a niche within a niche within a niche. You know what I mean? It's like, it's like Quantum Leap sci-fi, you know, there's so much, but it's such a small thing. But at the same time, it's like when you do approach that, I think that it's wonderful to be able to have that kind of understanding, that humility. And again, it adds to the texture of that sort of communal aspect of it. And with other fandoms, sometimes seeing the way that things get spiraled a little bit out of control, it's just nice to know that the people, yourself specifically, that are producing stuff that is so incredibly important, I feel like, to the fandom, that for you, it's about the book, it's not about you. And I love that. Dennis, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just kind of felt like we were the flow, the flow, I wanted to go that way with the conversation, but please ask your question, because I think it's brilliant.
So my question is, like, what is your plan for the new series? It only gets one season versus it gets renewed for a second season and maybe hopefully beyond.
So I've got a plan A and a plan B. So my plan A was, so I was always working on this second edition, which was going to be 2 volumes, the main series and the appendix. I escalated that early this year when the new series got announced. Like, right, I'm going to have to get this out. So the plan was, first volume 1, late this year. It's now going to be early next year, about the original series. Then volume 2 will be the new series and the appendices, which all seemed fine. Then I realized that I think subconsciously somewhere I was just assuming, not even really consciously, I was assuming that the show would only run 1 season. And I started thinking, okay, hang on, what if it gets renewed? So I do a volume 2 in 2023 that's the new series plus the appendices, but what happens a year later? Do I reissue volume 2 slightly expanded and then reissue it again a year after? I don't want to do that to the fans. So if it does get renewed for a second series, which everything crossed it will do, I will split those out into 2 volumes. So we have volume 1, which is the original series, volume 2, which will be a very slim volume covering the new series, and volume 3 covering the appendices. And then what that does is gives me a slim volume 2 that I can reissue each year and fans can pick up the new version or not, but it will be a lot cheaper than Volume 1 and Volume 3 because it will just be a much smaller volume. And I've seen a lot of episode guides, like the ones that Virgin were putting out in the 90s for Buffy and Angel and things like that did that, and it's they're reasonably cost effective to do. So that's my plan B, which I really hope becomes my plan A, because I would love to have a 3-volume version, because I would love to have more of the new series.
Fantastic. So basically you have 10, maybe 20 leaps.
Yes, exactly.
before you get there. So we need to start. We're going to start working towards wrapping up pretty soon. But I know you give us like a little bit of a rough timeline of like when you hope this next volume comes out, and just kind of get, if for, like we said on the other half of this podcast on QLP, like for the 3 people who listen to Fates Wide Wheel but don't listen to QLP, more information about you, where people can find you online.
Thank you. Yeah. So Volume 1, the volume on the original series, the 800 pages, will be out Q1 next year, probably February. There was a Kickstarter campaign for that, which is over. So it was on pre-order only. The idea is this deluxe version goes out Q1 next year, and then a bit later next year, a slightly less deluxe version goes out on print on demand. At the moment, early December, I can still take pre-orders for it. So although the Kickstarter campaign's over, if anyone would like to email me, they can find my contact details at quantumleapinfo.net. And what we can do is get you on the pre-order list, and then you'll get one of the deluxe Kickstarter versions in January, February time. And then that moves to print on demand later on in the year. And then volumes 2 and 3 definitely next year at some point. Sure. If volume 2 is just the slim volume for the new series, I want to get that out within a couple of weeks of the new series finishing. So I'm trying to work along with the new series so that I've got it in draft as close to publishable as possible. And then the second the final episode drops, I'm just rapidly wrapping it up, and it comes out soon after that. If it ends up being that bigger volume that includes the appendices, it may be a few months later. But that's something to keep an eye on Kickstarter for.
Fantastic. And we didn't even mention, like, aside from QLP, you and BTMI, you have your own website that you developed when the new series was announced, quantumleapinfo.net.
Yes. Yeah, so that was something I put together when the new series got announced. There was a lot of rumors flying around, and I just wanted to pull together every bit of information I could, and that was me again with my very nerdy head on. There was very little information out there, and I was able to find things like, well, okay, here's the studio that it's going to be made at, and because we know this, we know the capacity of the studio, we know how many floors the studio is on, how many offices it's got. I was putting all that kind of information out there because I was desperate for something. For sure. But quantumleapinfo.net has become the main resource for news and updates, and I'm doing a lot of work on it during the gap to bring that up to date, and do a lot of rumor control through it.
For sure. Fantastic.
Yeah, I think it was important, and it was such a valuable site to have. And I know that, Dennis and I were fortunate enough to be in a position to help a little bit, with contributions and stuff. But like, honestly, like even beyond that, any sort of personal stake, it was so important. I think just to the fandom, to the community, and to us specifically, that we were able to have the opportunity to have kind of that one-stop shop with all the latest, information. And there were times with Dennis and I, because Dennis and I were trying our best to stay on top of things too, right, and get like information as soon as we possibly could. And there were times when we would go and be like, man, how did he get that so fast? Because we would have something and we would be expecting to be like, oh, we should send this to Matt. And then all of a sudden you'd already have it. We'd be like, all right, well, like it's there.
Yeah, I think my proudest moment there was pipping the announcement of Mason to the post by about 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
Because Ray suddenly started following them on Instagram, and
yes.
was like, non-binary actor there. That's interesting.
Well, you shared that with us, and as soon as you shared it, it was just sort of like, that's cool. Like that's again, that's kind of that type of investigative work that I think that I hope that you're really proud of, because it not only in terms of the new series, but just in terms of the book itself, like you clearly you have the mind for that. You have, you have the work ethic for it. And I think that the wonderful thing is that we as a fandom and a community, we get to benefit from that. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you. And please, jumping back to what we said earlier, I think you would be perfectly qualified to write the oral history of Quantum Leap. I would love to hear it. I would love, some people on the show are so nice, they wouldn't tell us the juicy bits, but I would love to read that. And I think you're perfectly qualified to get there if hopefully if the new series like starts generating interest and actually having more volumes of Quantum Leap stuff.
Yeah, that would be something that would be amazing to get to at some point. Maybe after my my Sequest DSV guide, which been a running joke in my head for years.
One last question before we let you go, and before we let you plug all the things and everything. I do have to ask, when it comes to the new series, and kind of going off of what Dennis just said, how much new interest do you think the new series has generated for the classic series?
I hope a lot. I mean, the only insight I can share with you is, and you guys were a part of this, so maybe this is more insight for the audience, is the level of interest in BTMI, which for the first edition, I had a much lower threshold a much lower target that I was aiming for, and we got there in like a couple of days of launching. This time around, for various reasons, it was a much higher target, and we managed to hit that within a few hours. And I think I've pre-sold about 3 times as many copies. And yeah, my name's out there a bit more. The Quantum Leap podcast helps a little bit. You guys are always talking about me, but I really think a lot of the reason that it tripled in pre-order volume is because of the new series, making people think, I remember that show from years ago. I want to buy a book about it to refresh my memory. So I think maybe not as much new interest from new fans who weren't born at the time looking back, although hopefully there were, but I think maybe a lot of those casual fans from back in the day that have forgotten the series being reminded of it and going back and properly looking at them again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating to me because we've had the opportunity to speak to a couple of people who've mentioned that they're watching it with their children. Not the new series. I mean, they are, but they're also watching the classic series with them as well.
Amazing.
I think that's just so cool. And hearing the fact that, like, there's a 17-year-old boy in Montreal, Canada, for instance, who's experiencing the classic series for the first time. Like, that's just so cool. And to know that they're enjoying it, because I know for me being a fan, like there's a sense of almost trepidation where it's like, will they like it? And it was almost similar with Doctor Who. I remember during, in 2005, there was this part of me that was just sort of like, wow, there's going to be a lot of people that watch this. They're going to go back and watch the classic series. How are they going to feel? You know, and luckily it seems like people are enjoying it, and liking it. And we're hearing the good stuff anyway, which is nice.
Good. Yeah. Good. I hope so.
Yeah. So where can people find you, Matt? And more importantly, where specifically, you mentioned obviously that they can still get it. Where specifically can they go to purchase Beyond the Mirror Image?
So all my links are available from quantumleapinfo.net. Obviously, I'm a member of the Quantum Leap podcast team, which is at quantumleappodcast.com. But yeah, both my news site and the book are linked to from quantumleapinfo.net. And I'm also on Twitter as Matt_Dale, where I occasionally talk about QL as well.
Awesome.
Matt, thank you so much.
It was wonderful having you on the show. Let it not be another 5 years.
Yeah, let's talk again soon. I love talking to you guys.
I know. Fantastic. I really want to do it again soon because I didn't even get to ask you about like the comics and the novels and any new information about that. And you'll have to read the book, listeners. But I really want to talk more about that.
That's volume 2. So that's a good enough reason to talk about that.
Awesome. Matt, thank you again so very much. Make sure, again, as we've said before many times, even when we don't have one of their co-hosts on the podcast, make sure you're checking out the Quantum Leap podcast. If anything, just for multiple perspectives on the show, and follow Matt. He's fun, and he'll often chime in with some really cool stuff on Twitter, including showing off his broken Dalek prop from Remembrance of the Daleks. See how I brought it full circle there?
Professional.
All right, Dennis, get us out of here. Where can people find us, and what should they do when they want to find us? Or am I going to edit this out later because we're going to record a wraparound independent of this?
I'll record it just in case when we edit it out. Find us at fateswidewheel.com, fateswidewheel on all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're also on Discord. I got to figure out how to invite people onto Discord because that thing, the invite link changes every few days. But we're also on Hive now too. We're just throwing ourselves all over the place, like just in case Twitter one day actually burns to the ground, like everybody's saying that it's going to. But start off at fateswidewheel.com and Twitter for right now, like those are the biggest places, and TikTok as well at fateswidewheel. And yeah,
should we leap out of here?
Play us out, Sam. Leap out of here.
Thank you all so much for listening. Take care of yourselves. Take care of one another. And in the meantime, always remember to leap responsibly.